Hello, everyone. This is the episode 2 of Better Community podcast. Today, we want to talk about intercultural competence. But before that, I want to ask Magda to introduce herself. Maybe you want to share more about yourself, and tell us what are you doing exactly these days.
Sure. Hi. Thank you, first of all, for having me. Very happy to be joining your podcast today. My name is Magdalena Szumna, Magda for short. I'm a multicultural leadership expert, and I work with multicultural international teams at developing, indeed, their intercultural competence. So the topic of our conversation today. I have nearly 2 decades of corporate experience in my history after working for many, many years in global marketing in international, multinational companies. I have started working as an independent consultant, funded Indigo Diversity Consulting, which is my company helping organizations to foster an open culture of dialogue and equitable work for people coming from very different cultural and not only cultural backgrounds. So that's in principle what I do now. I work with teams in organizations, helping them to communicate better across cultural differences.
Great. So in the beginning, I forgot to introduce myself as well. This is Ben from Better Community, the founder of Better Community, and at Better Community, we are trying to empower international students to gain and acquire soft skills, transferable skills to navigate their career path. And one of the reasons I thought it's a good idea to talk with you is because I think intercultural competence and knowing about this concept is really helpful for them in their journey. And that's why I want to start with the first question, which is simple and easy. What is intercultural competence? And may I ask you why intercultural competence matters in today's world for international students?
I think the shortest answer is intercultural competence is a key competence in the globalized world of today. In multicultural teams, but also working with clients or suppliers. Nowadays, when you start working pretty much in any entity, you will sooner or later start collaborating with people coming from very different cultural backgrounds. And it is simply a great advantage in the job market. So more and more companies look actively for these sorts of competencies, meaning the knowledge and the skills to navigate intercultural encounters as part of the requirements, even if they are not explicitly listed in their job search. They will be probing for those type of skills as they embarking talent to the organizations, because that became basically part of what you do. And I think it's also a firm foundation for inclusive leadership skill set. And we can talk about it a little bit more. I feel that earlier you start building it, the better for your future career, simply. The culture of the organization, of course, you will be co-creating, depends on also how you show up in those interactions. So yeah, it's kind of at the core of what we do today in business.
So good. But the point is, imagine I'm a person who has no idea about it, and maybe still it's not clear for me. Can you please share more details or even 1-2 examples to make it more clear for me?
Of course. Absolutely. Well, when you think about intercultural competence, it's basically knowledge and skills that allow you to successfully navigate communicating and collaborating with people of different cultural backgrounds. So each of us, obviously, including the listeners, has a cultural background they come from. Sometimes it's more straightforward, sometimes it's more straightforward, but there's, of course, a certain set of values, beliefs, norms that we have absorbed as our normal or our way of doing things that informs our behaviors, that informs our choices we make. And that, of course, works very well in homogeneous groups where everyone acts, behaves, and believes similar things. Once you step into environments where people come from very different sets of values, norms, and their behaviors might differ. That becomes, of course, a potential source of at least frustration, if not conflict. And I think in today's globalized world where, one moment you are in a meeting with colleagues, maybe from different parts of the world, the next moment you're answering emails to customers from a very different part of the world, and in the second someone on Slack sends you a message, from your local team, you continuously switch and maybe even unknowingly go into intercultural encounters every day in your work. For many international students, I imagine that's the case already, as you obviously live and breathe international environment during your studies.
Which means in that situation, we need to learn how to learn about ourselves, which means, more self-awareness, as well as try to learn more about others and try to find similarities and differences between these two worlds and how we can fill that gap between these two sides.
Absolutely.
Right?
How to navigate it more successfully, how to maybe flex your own style to meet the other person in their kind of comfort zone, or try to renegotiate ways of doing and being that might be more, let's say, effective in kind of overcoming this feeling of strangeness. The way I like to look at intercultural encounters is indeed every interaction or every encounter where this kind of feeling of strangeness appears, right? So you can have that with a person from completely different cultural background, but you can also have that with someone who just has very different sets of beliefs or norms, right? And that's that moment of, oh, that was different, or that's strange, or somehow uncomfortable, is the moment in which these type of competencies or skills come handy. So instead of kind of going into frustration or judgment, you are invited to suspend judgment and instead approach the situation with curiosity and openness to that difference, and ask yourself, oh, this is interesting. What is this telling me, first of all, about myself? To your point, self-awareness, of course, is always the first step. But then what does this tell me potentially about the values and norms that are driving this behavior or that situation? And I think it can always, I always say it can be, of course, easier said than done, especially when this feeling of strangeness that kind of is present in the encounter is strong, right? It often can provoke some emotions, some frustration, or, even anger when you go like, that was just not fun, or that's
right.
kind of crossing my boundaries. But it does indeed start with an attitude of openness and curiosity instead of judgment.
Now I'm thinking about some practical steps, or maybe any advice you can share with us. Okay, I'm an international student living in totally new country with a different context. Everything, or maybe most of the things, are new for me. Now, if I want to improve my intercultural communication skills, what do you have to share with us?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things, of course. It starts, like we said, it starts with what you can do yourself first, right? What you can do yourself is, of course, remind yourself of that attitude we've just talked about. Reflect in every situation that you do run into this feeling of strangeness, because, for example, let's make it practical. A communication style, you experience some potential frustration with that. So for many internationals, be that students or people who work in business, the direct, explicit, or how it's also referred to, kind of low context communication style of the locals in the Netherlands presents a challenge at first. I see you nodding. I guess you might be recognizing that as well. I hear people say, it comes across as rude or insensitive, or sometimes even abrupt, like it goes into your heart and you feel, oh, that was harsh, right? The person saying something very kind of directly and for example, saying, no, I can't do it tonight, or this is not possible. or giving a very direct feedback, which is very confrontational. Yet when we take a step back and try to kind of understand the values that drive this type of communication style, right? So we remove ourselves from this first emotional reaction, but we ask ourselves, okay, what's happening here? I'm curious. Why is it so different than how I would potentially do that? You recognize that it's actually transparency, honesty, openness that stand behind this choice of communication style, right? The clearer you are, the more to the point you are. I don't have to second guess what you mean. You say it as it is. Both sides feel safe. There's no hidden agendas. These are the type of values that drive the choice of that level of communication. And knowing that, hopefully you can draw a little bit more distance to what's happening in yourself and feel, oh, okay, that's how that different translates into our behaviors. But really deep down, I can relate to those values as well. Even though maybe my cultural context taught me that group cohesion is much more important, right? Not actually causing someone to lose face might be more important. Or simply I was taught or made to believe that more indirect way of telling someone something is not going right is the right way to do things. I can still open myself to different ways of doing and thinking about it. So that's just one example of how the difference can translate. To come back to your question, what can you do therefore? Well, the more, of course, you find yourself in situations that feeling of strangeness occurs, the better you can navigate them. So invitation is put yourself out there consciously, I would say, evaluate what's happening. And with curiosity, ask why, how. This is what I'm experiencing. Was that your intention? Or, my choice would have been this. What do you think? And then we can learn about each other. We can kind of go deeper into, okay, instead of, oh, that was just that was not on, right? We can really become curious of that difference. So self-awareness, curiosity and openness, asking questions. In terms of more formalized ways of course, learning about it, there's multiple models, schools of thought that talk about intercultural competence that you can either, of course, research yourself or follow some of the courses that are available. Of course, I know that a lot of the universities do pay attention to the topic, and it's either embedded in other topics as an element of, or standalone courses on intercultural communication are being offered.
And unfortunately, not lots of, but at least few universities in their programs, they are not providing these kind of concepts, which means they are more focusing on harder skills. But in terms of these kind of approaches or skills, you are not, putting lots of efforts. I just want to ask you to share some main resource that you think it should be or it could be beneficial for international students just to take a look at them, or I don't know, any TED Talks, articles or things like that. Yeah, definitely later on they can check your profile on LinkedIn or on your Instagram, because I know you are sharing lots of content and things like that over there. But for now, if you want to share 1, 2, 3,
absolutely. Yeah, very happy to. So, in terms of the kind of models that are being used and where you can read about them or where you can learn about them, there is this quite popular cultural dimensions model, which allows you to kind of unpack all those invisible elements of culture that we talked about. So the values, norms, and kind of systematize them a little bit. A good book to start with, if you haven't really learned much about it yet, it's quite a widely accessible book called The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. Pretty much every bookstore will have it in stock, especially in the Netherlands. It's become quite a popular source of intercultural knowledge for businesses. It's quite simple, but it talks indeed about how to navigate the world of business. Examples there given are very translatable to any interaction you might have also in your time of studying. The other sources, well, definitely, if you have access to LinkedIn Learning, there's plenty of courses there which talk about intercultural competency or multicultural leadership, which effectively speaks about applying those skills into the leadership position. So how do you manage, lead, and inspire a multicultural team if you're becoming a person of in a leadership position? There's also a very, well, of course, you mentioned LinkedIn, Instagram. Very happy for people to, of course, check out what I share. I tend to post quite frequently different tips and thought posts relating to either different elements of the cultural dimensions model, but also around diversity sensitive communication. So look at it a bit broader than culture itself. Because one important element to remember is we all, of course, have cultural backgrounds, but by no means does that define who we are as a whole human being, of course. We also have different elements of identity that might be sometimes even conflicting with the cultural norms and values that we've been brought up to believe are the right thing to do, right? So I like to look at it as a repertoire of norms and beliefs that we can choose to act on, but we can choose not to act on. And that is an interesting way of looking at it with a diversity-sensitive communication, I would say, lens, to really think about how those different intersecting elements of our identity play a role in interaction. So we might not be talking here about, me being Polish, talking to an international student. I might be talking to you as a person of Persian descent. I might be talking to you as a man and I'm a woman, right? I might be talking to you, there's so many different elements of our identities that we can bring to the forefront in that interaction that will inform how you look at this interaction differently, if it makes sense.
Which means what I understand now, it's really complicated and it's kind of we need to, multidimensional, which means we need to try to consider everything. But maybe it's a good idea now to talk about something interesting. Speaking of barriers for international students, usually language barriers are one of the main ones, which is really important, and sometimes they are struggling a lot to understand authors, also connect with the new context, adopt with that new context, and integrate with that new context. Do you have any advice in terms of overcoming these kind of barriers?
Language is, of course, a huge element of, both culture, but also, of course, intercultural encounters or communication, as typically, not always, but of course, in a lot of the instances, we tend not to communicate in our native tongue when we enter those communication situations. So like us here today, speaking English, neither of us is native in English, but reasonably fluent to have that flowing easily, which isn't always, of course, the case. Well, there's a number of things to consider. Of course, as you step into intercultural competencies and say your fluency is actually better than your partners in the interaction, of course, take that into account as you interpret the situation, right? Mm-hmm. The person might not always express themselves as well as they would in their native tongue. So that might be playing into, for example, potential misunderstandings. They might be translating quite literally from the language they are more accustomed to English, for example. And that, of course, does not always 100% translate in the meaning or in the sense of it and the intention of it. So keep that in mind. When it comes to, I would say, yourself not being fully fluent or maybe comfortable with expressing yourself, I always invite people to be transparent about it. Again, less about, how it comes across, more about genuine willingness to build a connection and openness and say, hey, I'm not entirely sure how to express this. Let me try to describe it better. Or I didn't mean it to come across as such. If there is already a situation of discomfort, think about both your intention, but also the effect it has on the other person. Because, we often kind of say, but I didn't intend to. Well, the effect it has on someone is leading in how that interaction actually transpires. So if your limitation in language is preventing you from expressing yourself 100%, account for that in the interaction. Invite maybe a conversation in the language that you do feel more comfortable with, if that is at all an option. Ask for people to slow down. Ask for people to use simpler sentence constructions, like, okay, this is a little bit too quick for me. Could you please rephrase? Don't repeat, please rephrase. So these would be the kind of simplest things that come to mind.
Last year, around 10, 11 months ago, when I moved to the Netherlands, that was my second experience of moving to another country. In the beginning, I was struggling a lot in terms of communicating with people in English, because English is my second language, as you mentioned. At that time, I found that I'm kind of perfectionist, which means, okay, I don't want to say I'm really good, but I'm good enough in my native language to present in front of the people, and also, facilitating the conversations, different conversations, tough conversations with different people. I did a lot before that, but I'm not good enough. At that time, I was thinking, okay, I'm not good enough, which means, okay, when I'm not good enough, I have to try not to do anything. 8-9 months ago, I decided to start this podcast in English, but for a few months, I struggled a lot with myself. Okay, let's improve myself first. Then, a few weeks ago, I just decided, okay, if you want to wait till the time you are perfect in communicating in English, then you never ever start this podcast.
Absolutely.
And I just decided to jump. I just wanted to ask you if you have any more advice in terms of just trying to start the things, even if you are not perfect. Do you have any advice related to this experience?
I think inspiration by exactly stories like you've just shared is probably the most telling, and I think the most relatable thing for people. There isn't a one silver bullet that will solve it for all our, of course, comfort with discomfort. It's very different. Actually, that's also one of the elements that you could look at from a cultural lens perspective. How much are we actually ready to embrace change? How easily do we adapt to new situations? And therefore, how risk tolerant or risk averse are we? Is also culturally shaped. So maybe another input for self-reflection to think, how comfortable am I with this new environment, with actually, stepping into the unknown and putting yourself out there. To use your example, one thing I've learned in my long international career is everyone has those thoughts of, I'm not good enough. Am I imposing here? The famous imposter syndrome finds us all, regardless of whether you are in the beginning of your journey or you already halfway, in your career. There is always going to be something you don't feel fully equipped to do, or you feel like you might fail. It is about building this muscle of resilience to try. What's the worst that can happen, right? What is the worst that can happen? And I think, especially for a lot of international students, you embark on international study not because you are not ambitious. It's typically the type of people who actually want to grow, want to learn, want to do the best. So perfectionism will be part of your trail, which is a great trail to have, but sometimes can be, not helpful.
So now I'm thinking about the next step for international students because after graduation, they need to start their journey in the job market. They are searching for different jobs, they are applying, sometimes they are struggling in terms of finding great opportunities for themselves. What tips or what advice do you have for international students to build their careers in multicultural settings?
I think we could talk about that for a whole episode, I would imagine. I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Again, the huge power you hold as, I would say, a young talent, a new talent joining an organization in actually choosing where do you want to put that talent to work. So my huge invitation always, whenever I work with students, and I've had the pleasure of delivering some guest lectures at different universities, is don't come into the, say, job market search with a feeling of, oh, I need to convince people to, to take me on board. It's actually you bringing an enormous amount of energy, knowledge, and willingness to grow that those organizations want, need, and are looking for. So confidence in that is, I would say, my first invitation. The second piece is around really consciously choosing organizations that you feel are aligned with your values. So the worst thing that can happen is that when you start working, giving 100% of your talents to an organization that ultimately does not feel right? The type of people you end up working with, or the types of dynamics you start encountering, somehow are not aligned with what you believe is the right thing to do. I think the job market nowadays is both fantastic in terms of, the abundance of opportunities, remote working, hybrid working. You can pretty much work anywhere, right? If you start thinking about it in broader terms. But at the same time, it is a very fluid and very volatile environment. And I hear from a lot of young people saying, they're struggling to actually secure the internships, or if the internship is there, it falls through. It's not an easy place to compete. Find your own, I would say, dream place and go for it. Don't spread yourself too thin is my invitation. So think really, what is it that you would love to do? Be specific. So if it is, I don't know, communication marketing, and you are super into sports, target these type of organizations. If it is, I don't know, more tech-related topics because you're so into gaming and you really want to actually put your passion and your expertise in communication into this sort of go there. The more aligned you are with your own interests and passions, the better you will do into interviews, and then of course the more you're gonna thrive in the organization.
Yeah, it's right, but the point is, as an international student, I know no one, and no one knows me in the beginning, which means I need some strategies to connect with
network,
the context, which is networking. And in terms of networking skills, or I prefer to say community building, I want to ask you why international students, it's a must for international students to develop their networking strategies for these diverse environments. What are the benefits, how they can learn more about effective networking strategies? Yeah, definitely it's really important, but why and how?
Yes, definitely important. I will stress that once again. Well, first of all, your network of other peer students and people who are at your educational institution, as broadly speaking as possible, right? And that is your current peers, but also people who have been there before. Any society.
I mean, it's the first and important first step, but is it to continue?
No, of course it's not going to solve you for the future. But what I have learned also in my career, I've also started, I would say, outside of my country of origin at some point, without knowing people around here. As you start stepping into those forms, you never know where they will take you. So it's, again, being open and curious about kind of following those threads of, okay, I've met that person, maybe through a university, I don't know, a interest group or any of your hobby groups, right? Your, I don't know, sports clubs, your anything else you do actually outside of university. Put yourself out there in the broadest terms again. Talk to people about your interests. I find it now with my entrepreneurial journey, once I've stepped out of the corporate world, you never know where your connections will take you and what opportunities will open. So the kind of more broadly you look at your networking, and it doesn't have to be professional networking only, the better. So basically, I laugh, but your neighbors, your sports club, your groups of interest, your hobbies, everything that actually allows you to meet people and diverse people. So also think consciously about, how does my group of friends and people I hang out with look like? Are they all just like me? Am I sticking to my own, for example, group of international students who come from the same region as I do? Do I actually make connections with people from very different backgrounds? Where do I put my energy and time, and who I tell about who I am and what I want to do in life? This is a really important one, because the more we kind of close ourselves to people who are just like us, especially in an environment that is foreign to an extent, the more you're limiting your chances.
What you mean is side activities outside the universities are really important in terms of expanding our networks, building new connections and things like that, right?
Good. Absolutely. And then there's also, societies for of course, specific topics, right? Or groups of interest, either cross university or within the kind of student or volleyball community is a great example of that, right? Like there's initiatives which you can tap into either from, let's say, formalized perspective, like venue community, or mentoring opportunities for young talent, or any other kind of networking topical places.
So I have lots of other things that I want to talk about, but the point is, so we decided to just 40 minutes try to finish this episode. So for the last point, because you already mentioned about the entrepreneurship, your journey, as well as practical skills, softer skills in the career paths of international students. One of them definitely should be leadership. And you already mentioned about this concept as well. For the last but not least question, I want to ask you about leadership skill in a multicultural setting. Definitely it's important. Okay. My question is how international students can try to develop these skills in their daily life, prepare themselves for their future career paths, or coping with their colleagues, embracing the opportunity in the job market.
For sure. Well, as you, of course, embark on your career journey, the kind of leadership track will be one of the potential routes you're going to go to, right? As you become more senior, opportunities to actually lead teams will formally will become an option. The way I like to look at leadership is actually much broader again, and it is about self-leadership. So how do you take charge of your own path and journey, and how do you lead yourself through the different choices you make? So when you look at it from that perspective, of course, the leadership skill set becomes a skill set of, well, we talked about self-reflection, knowing yourself, investigating at all times, what is it that feels right? What is it that doesn't feel right? How can I connect with people on I would say, human level, build those connections and leverage them for myself? Of course, as you embark on your career journey, there are formal leadership programs which teach you skills such as communication skills, management, how to motivate people, how to collaborate effectively, how to self-lead. in a context of multicultural teams, everything we talked about, of course, applies 200%, because once you start collaborating and then potentially leading teams of people from different cultural backgrounds, having that openness, curiosity, and the skills to adapt and to flex that muscle we talked about earlier become very, very, very important. One other element, I think, especially for the kind of in between phase of, maybe finalizing your studies, stepping into your first internships, or taking on first job opportunities, think about situations in your life which required you to lead in a broadest sense. So again, it doesn't have to be a formal, I managed a team of 5, but university initiatives such as, I don't know, leading a book club, putting together a group of projects to deliver a certain thing. How in those micro situations can you consciously develop those skills, thinking about, okay, how am I showing up? How am I bringing these people together? What can I do differently to engage people behind my idea? Test and try, and the more you can speak to it and you can elaborate about, this is how I did it, this is what worked, this is what I've learned. These are huge case points which you can bring then as you apply for positions to say, this is how I look at my own journey.
We are almost done. I don't have any other question. It's clear that talking about this interesting concept, talking about cultural diversity, intercultural competence, and things like that, it's more time. There are lots of details we have to consider, but for now, we just wanted to start a simple conversation about the main concept. Maybe in the future we will do more, and hopefully, as I mentioned, and you also mentioned, there are lots of content, books, YouTube videos, podcast episodes. If anyone wants to go deeper, they can find it. But for the last point, do you have any final thoughts or advice for international students? Maybe I forgot to ask any specific question and you think it's really important to stress on it.
I think in terms of the kind of key messages I want to leave you with, maybe, or kind of a summary, it really is about equally the knowledge and the skills as it is about attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the things you can control definitely is the attitude you show up in those interactions with. Interactions such as we talked about, those which might potentially fill you with a feeling of strangeness or somehow discomfort because you are out of your comfort zone, which kind of defines the experience of being an international student, right? You are per definition outside of your cultural context. You might be meeting a lot of new people. Stay open, stay curious, ask for what you need, and ask why certain things, might feel a certain way. Don't be a stranger, I would say. And I know, again, it's a very challenging sometimes ask, but try to make connections with people who are different from you. It really is the biggest invitation, I guess. And I strongly believe it's so enriching to actually meet people who think, look, behave differently than us. It's only then that your comfort zone grows and you grow as a person. So that's my invitation and my encouragement. In terms of any additional sources, I'm very happy to send you a couple of things that you can link to an episode if you'd like to. The reference to the book I met. I also recorded a podcast if you want to link it about diversity competence model. That might be interesting for some to listen to. Happy to share. And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Also, thank you once again for joining us today and sharing your valuable insights. For listeners, if they are interested to learn more about this concept, definitely they can listen to your podcast, following you on different social media channels. We are publishing this episode on different channels such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and if they are interested to learn more, they can follow us on different platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And for now, bye.